continuous coverage here on WION of Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India's ongoing visit to Palestine. In news just coming in, Prime Minister Modi was escorted to Ramallah in a chopper provided by the Jordan government and was escorted by choppers from Israel Air Force. This is news just coming in about an update as part of Prime Minister Modi's ongoing visits to Palestine. Prime Minister Modi was escorted to Ramallah in a chopper provided by the Jordanian government and was escorted by choppers from the Israeli Air Force. And joining me live from the WION newsroom is my senior colleague Surya Gangadharan. Surya, good afternoon. Good to have you join this discussion. What do you make of this news update coming in from Ramallah of the Jordanian government lending a chopper for Prime Minister Modi? All right, I'm told I'll be joined soon, momentarily, by Surya Gangadharan, our senior editor, joining us from the WION newsroom. Surya, if you can hear me, what do you make of this news update coming in from Ramallah that Jordanian government lent a chopper for Prime Minister Modi? It was escorted by the Israeli Air Force as well.
Well, there were Israeli helicopters that escorted him. You could say this is a courtesy extended by the Israeli government. But I think more than anything else, this is an assertion of Israeli power. They are the ones who decide who goes into Ramallah, despite all the dressings of statehood that the Palestinians have. They decide who goes in, who stays out. And in that sense, they've given permission to the Prime Minister to proceed to Ramallah under Israeli escort. So it's a courtesy, but it's an assertion of so many other things. It's a signal that the Israelis are sending, and not just to India, but to the whole world.
Also, Surya, we're seeing these visuals, latest from Ramallah, of the Palestine president conferring the highest civilian award on Prime Minister Modi, the Grand Collar of the state of Palestine. What do you make of this special gesture on the part of President Mahmoud Abbas?
Well, it's symbolic. It symbolizes the age-old support that India has extended to the Palestinians. Also the fact that it's a celebration of the fact that the first Indian Prime Minister has set foot on Palestinian soil. So it's an occasion for beleaguered people like the Palestinians that they are getting some kind of international recognition from a middle power in Asia, and one that has been their supporter for many years. Although the ground levels have changed, the ground rules have changed, the environment in the Middle East has changed, that support for Palestine remains as far as India goes.
All right. On that note, Surya, thank you so much for your inputs. That was Surya Gangadharan joining us live from the WION newsroom. All right. I want to take that same point across to Ambassador Singh, who continues to be within the studio. Ambassador Singh, what do you make of this report coming in from Ramallah of the Jordanian government lending a chopper for Prime Minister Modi and also it being escorted by the Israeli Air Force?
So I think our Prime Minister going to Ramallah in a Jordanian helicopter, that was important, because if he went in an Israeli helicopter, then the dehyphenation would not have happened. So he had to go in a Jordanian helicopter to show that this visit was not combined with any visit to Israel. At the same time, the area, as we know, is in Israel's occupation and Israel's security control. And therefore, it is not a surprise that Israeli helicopters provided the security cover, because at one level it is an assertion that this area is under our control, but at the same time it is Israel which is responsible for security of that area. And therefore it would be natural for Israeli helicopters to escort the Prime Minister to ensure that there is no security concern arising from that. Therefore, I'm not really surprised that this is the kind of arrangement that was worked out, emphasizes the dehyphenation, and at the same time Israel ensures that security aspect is handled carefully.
Sure. Ambassador Singh, hold your thought. I'm joined once again by my colleague A Pagani, who is live in Ramallah. Good afternoon, Daniele. Very quickly, this news update coming in from Ramallah that Prime Minister Modi's chopper was lent by the Jordanian government and was escorted by the Israeli Air Force. What are you picking up about this news update coming in from Ramallah?
Well, regarding the fact that he was traveling on a Jordanian airport, that was on the Jordanian helicopter, beg your pardon, that was part of the plan. The Hashemite kingdom of Jordan provided him the chopper. This is important, as our guest just said, because otherwise the dehyphenation wouldn't have happened. So this is yet once again another way to state that the Prime Minister of India is not using any Israeli facility when it comes to transporting himself from Jordan to Palestine. When it comes to the Israeli choppers escort reporting it, look, this cannot be anything else. Remember that the Palestinian territories, only 15% of the Palestinian territories are under actual control of the Palestinian Authority. And certainly, this does not include the airspace. The Israeli Air Forces do control whoever takes off and whoever lands into Palestinian territories. So there is no other military helicopter who could have escorted Prime Minister Narendra Modi while traveling from Amman and entering then the Palestinian skies. Also, the Israeli forces, the Israeli Air Forces, are responsible for the security of any dignitary transiting over the state of Israel, the official border of Israel. Therefore, it couldn't have been different.
Also, Daniele, what more can you share about the conferment of the highest Palestinian award on Prime Minister Modi, the Grand Collar of the State of Palestine?
This is definitely a way that the Palestinian Authority has to reiterate the necessity of remaining good and old political friends. Prime Minister Narendra Modi initiated this exchange of kind and respectful gestures. How so? A, de-hyphenating the visit. Remember, I repeat it once again because this is the most important part of Narendra Modi's visit. He is not traveling through Israel in order to reach Ramallah. He came here in this presidential palace on a Jordanian helicopter. He came directly from Amman, so he's not visiting Israel. This was the first gesture. The second one, as soon as he landed, he paid tribute to Yasser Arafat, who is considered by the majority of Palestinians the father of the idea of an independent Palestine. This was also a very high gesture of respect. Therefore, in exchange, the Palestinian Authority, to lay the foundation of a positive round of meeting, of a positive positive signatures of memorandum of understandings, conferred him the highest civilian honor. This is an exchange of kind gestures which can tell us that there is definitely on both sides the willingness to keep the relation in a positive way.
All right, Daniel, do stay on just to bring our viewers up to speed with the latest news coming in from Ramallah. As Daniele was pointing out then, a special recognition of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's contribution to relations between India and Palestine. President Mahmoud Abbas of Palestine conferred the Grand Collar of the State of Palestine on Prime Minister Modi after the conclusion of the bilateral meeting. The Grand Collar is the highest order given to foreign dignitaries, kings and heads of state. It has in the past been awarded to King Salman of Saudi Arabia, King Hamad of Bahrain and President Xi Jinping of China, among others. The commendation reads, and I quote, "In recognition of his wise leadership and his lofty national and international stature, and in appreciation of his efforts to promote the historic relations between the State of Palestine and the Republic of India, in acknowledgement of his support to our people's right to independence and freedom so that peace prevails in the region," end quote. So that's the latest news coming in from Ramallah, and you're watching the continuous coverage here on WION of Prime Minister Modi's West Asia tour. Remember, you're watching the latest visuals of Prime Minister Modi meeting with President Mahmoud Abbas of Palestine in Ramallah, and we are getting you all the latest along with the full complement of reporters on the ground and in the WION headquarters here on the outskirts of the capital, New Delhi. All right, as we continue our coverage and our discussion here in the studio with Ambassador Arun Singh. Ambassador Singh, we were talking about the dynamic obtaining in the West Asian region as a whole. You pointed out the crisis in the GCC, for instance. Now, looking at India's engagement with countries in the West Asian region, it is a political minefield, no doubt. How do you think India should maneuver, navigate this so-called minefield?
So as we discussed earlier, clearly this is a region to which India needs to give attention, to give enhanced attention because of the presence of the more than 8 billion people of Indian origin. They repatriate more than $35 billion worth of remittances to India. The region accounts for 20% of India's trade. It's a major source of our energy requirements.
Right.
So with all that, it's a critical area. And again, countries in the region have differences with each other. The region is also going through a lot of flux. For example, the Gulf Cooperation Council, a grouping of 8 countries, had earlier been set up because the Arab countries had concerns related to Iran. The GCC is now splitting up because Saudi Arabia and UAE have great difficulties with Qatar. Egypt has difficulties with Qatar. And Saudi Arabia and some of the other countries see Iran as a more immediate challenge to their interests than even Israel. And therefore, in Israel and otherwise, there is talk of some convergence of interests between Israel and the Arab countries in the context of Iran. So the whole region is in a state of flux. And I think given that, we have to see that in this evolving situation, what is the kind of new engagements we can build up? One, for example, we have a great deal of interest in UAE because the UAE has committed to invest almost $75 billion from its sovereign funds in India. So if that is done, it will lead to job creation in India, Make in India would be facilitated. UAE has also looked at creating an oil reserve in India or contributing to that. So there are many dimensions to this relationship, and clearly we should look at building at a bilateral relationship which each element of this many-sided equation and advance our interests on that basis.
Sure. At this point in time, I'm joined by Khedira Gora, a non-resident fellow at the Brookings Doha Center, who joins us live via Skype from London. Now, Khedira Gora focuses on India's relations with the Gulf states, drawing on experience in India's foreign policy spanning both policy making and academia. As an Australian diplomat, he covered bilateral ties with India, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, Iraq and the European Union, and undertook trade analysis and public diplomacy. And as a senior advisor at Australia's Refugee Tribunal, he examined the human rights situation obtaining in South Asia. Thank you so much for joining us on this discussion this hour. If I can begin by asking you, what do you make your initial thoughts or impressions about Prime Minister Modi's ongoing visit to Palestine?
Yes, I think it's obviously a very historic visit. I think it helps India portray itself as a balanced and independent player and a rising power in world politics. I think that in terms of the dehyphenation we've heard a lot about, I think that really is rhetoric to describe a strategic independence and India taking on, I guess, a somewhat unique role in world politics as a country that has good relations not only with Iran and the Arab states, including the Palestinians, but also with Israel. And I think that this visit sort of further emphasizes that point, particularly as it comes quite soon after the visit by Prime Minister Netanyahu to India.
Now, you mentioned about some countries in the region, especially in the Persian Gulf region, namely Iran. And that brings me to my next question, which I asked Ambassador Arun Singh in the studio as well. Would you agree with the submission by some people around the world that possibly and probably Iran is the new fault line in West Asia or the Middle East, not necessarily Israel?
Hello?
Yeah, are you with me? Can you hear me?
Hello, yes. Was that question, directed to me?
Yes, I was wanting to ask you about the dynamic obtaining in West Asia, or the Middle East as some call it, and you referred to Iran there in your opening remark. And I meant to ask you, would you agree with the submission that possibly and probably Iran is the new fault line obtaining in West Asia, not necessarily Israel that much?
I think you could describe it in that sense, given that it is correct that Saudi Arabia and Israel have converging strategic interests at the moment, and there's been some rapprochement between those two states. But there are also other fault lines. So as the ambassador mentioned, there's fault lines within the GCC occurring. There's also the Syria conflict. And I think this reflects a very important point in that there are also fault lines between the great powers. So you've got countries which are allied with the West, like Israel and Saudi Arabia, and then you've also got states which are supported to some degree by Russia, like Syria, and to a lesser extent Iran. And I guess the role, this provides, I guess, an interesting position for countries like India and China, which have a sort of a very, which can be seen as having a very centrist or moderate position, given these two poles with Russia on one side and the West on the other.
Now, you spoke about the possible role which India and China could play going forward, but my counterintuitive question would be, what can India and China do if the stakeholders in the region, namely Saudi Arabia themselves, have gone in for rapprochement with Israel. So where does it leave other interlocutors outside players such as India and China?
Yes, I think it still provides a role for India and China, particularly given that the Middle East is becoming more multipolar, and the United States, over the long term, because of economic reasons, it's more energy independent, will become less engaged in the region relative to other powers. You also see that within the domestic politics in the United States, where you've got a lot of actors and political leaders taking a more non-interventionist stance. And even Donald Trump, before he won power, was touting more non-interventionist talking points. So over time, you're going to see greater opportunities for involvement for countries like China and India. And one relevant point to Palestine is that the Palestinian leadership has suggested a multilateral forum to resume peace talks and has called for India's involvement in that. And I think that's somewhere where India can play an important role, given it has such a good reputation amongst all players in the region.
And talking about President Donald Trump's moves of late, how do you look at his decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel? Would you say that this decision has galvanized the Arab countries against Israel and the US? I mean, has it just allowed the index of opposition unity to go up just that bit?
Yes, I think it has, and it's also provided space for other Muslim countries like Turkey to step in and play a greater role as well. And I think what it's done is given some momentum to the Palestinian leadership to fire up about an issue, and then also an excuse for them to try and bring other players into the Middle East, which would annoy the US. I think the last thing the United States would want to see is China and Russia having a greater role in that process.
Right. Ambassador Singh, coming back to you now, just to go back to the point we were making earlier, India has good ties with all major players in the region. So in your estimation, what can Prime Minister Modi do going forward to leverage that vis-a-vis the West Asian countries?
So I think he should really look at using this opportunity to consolidate our relations with every country. And we have interest in each one of those countries. Now, if I just took, for example, Iran, we have energy interests in Iran. We also have connectivity interests for connectivity to Afghanistan, to Central Asia, and potentially also to Russia and Eastern Europe. Iran can be a very important transit route, and therefore we need to work on that. Similarly, with countries in the Gulf region, we have energy and other interests involved. With Israel, we have high technology interests involved, and we have interests related also to defense. And another dimension is that good relations with Israel helps us also with the Jewish community in the United States. And they become very supportive of moving forward with the India-US relationship, which again is a very important relationship for us. So all these things are linked. And I think we should really look at using this opportunity to show to each of these countries that you have greater interest in engagement with India. Now, as we discussed earlier, today the world is in a flux. And with the new US administration, President Trump coming in, moving it away from a globalization direction, talking more of make America great again, looking at US core interests, many of the countries in the Gulf are also looking at alternative opportunities for trade and investment. And for them, again, India will provide and a growing opportunity with its young population, growing population, and growing economic size. So I think we have to see how do we create new opportunity for economic investment and political engagement between India and countries in West Asia.
Right. Khedira, Gora, I thought you wanted to come in.
I would agree with that. I think that the Gulf countries are looking to diversify their strategic partnerships. I think that they see that what's happening in the long term is that they would need to build stronger relationships in not just commercial but even defense sectors with countries like India and China, particularly given that these countries are now some of the biggest energy importers from the region.
And very quickly on the point of Iran, now as somebody looking at South Asia from the outside, how would you describe India-Iran relations, especially given the anxieties it is causing to countries in the region and beyond? Why do I ask this question? Because some would say India lost an opportunity to build on ties with Iran because of the negotiations India was having on the nuclear deal with the US in the early 2000s. And Iran consequently cancelled an LNG deal contract with India. And since then, the relations have only nosedived. It's only now that because of Afghanistan, India is stepping up its ties with Iran. But going forward, gazing into the crystal ball, as it were, you think India can withstand the pressures, given the pressures exerted by Israel, the US, and other countries in the region and beyond?
I think it can, because I think that a fundamental principle that India still adheres to is strategic independence, and it will follow its own interests, and those interests are quite large when it comes to Iran, given the region, the connectivity, and obviously access to Afghanistan, issues with Pakistan. So I think that India would be able to resist that. Also because those countries you mentioned, like the United States and Israel, need India quite a lot. So, for example, Israel sees India as a great sort of PR relationship, given its leadership in the developing world. It's a big market for Israeli defense equipment. And I think the United States as well needs India. It's looking to India as a sort of balance against China to some degree. And so I think those points of leverage allow India to maintain its strategic independence and maintain relationships with countries like Iran.
Since you also cover Sri Lanka, I have to ask this question. If a country like Norway could involve itself in peace building or mediation with Sri Lanka, what stops India from playing a more influential role in the West Asian or the Middle East peace process? Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's been maybe a tradition of sort of non-interference and also a lack of diplomatic resources to become involved. But I think, thankfully, that's being changed, and the Foreign Service is getting more resources. And I think also the Indian public and the Modi government see that region as part of India's future sphere of influence and its backyard. So I do think that while there has been blocks in the past on India getting more involved, I think going forward, we're already seeing it. We're seeing naval cooperation, etc. I think going forward, we will see more Indian involvement.
Right. Ambassador Singh wanted to come in?
Yeah, I just want to say that it would not be fair to compare Norway's interests with India's, because as you know, Norway had also played a very important role in the context of the Oslo peace process between Israel and the Palestinians. And very often a country that doesn't have a stake in the relationship is able to provide a framework and a format where the interested parties come together. And building on their role in the Oslo peace process, Norway, which didn't really have very deep stakes in Sri Lanka, were able to play a role. So I think it's not a very fair comparison in that sense. And but of course, it's an important point that you're making.